Hey everyone, if you follow me over on Instagram or Twitter, or I guess Facebook on my personal account, you know that this year I set a goal to finish 52 books in 2018. And then as soon as I started trying to do this, it became kind of an addiction of trying to finish things. And so I've tried to double that. So hopefully I'll finish 104 books in 2018. And I've been posting many little kind of review summaries, a little bit of what I'm learning from each of the books over on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as I finish them. Although they're out of order. If you don't know that, I don't know why you would know that. I post them all out of order. There's a whole weird way in which I post things like that on my social media accounts. But so since we are halfway through the year, I thought it would be fun to kind of tell you my 10 picks for the best books that I finished thus far this year. As of right now, I finished 45 books. So I'm almost done with my 52 that I need to do in this year, which is a nice little thing to do. So these are my 10 favorites, and instead of having an honorable mention list, I chunked together some of the ones that I did. And as I go through them, you'll see there's common themes in some of the ones that I put together, and they're all my bottom three, so you'll pick up on this very quickly. So it's been very it's been a good experience to try and expose myself to so many different ideas, types of stories, and think deeper about things this year. So it's been a year of growth and learning, and I've been enjoying it quite a bit. Without further delay, I guess I'll just dive into this. Coming in at number 10 is going to be Malcolm Gladwell catalog. I'll just phrase it that way. So right now, Malcolm Gladwell might be my favorite author. I just like the way he thinks. And I don't necessarily always like his conclusions or where he ends up on things, but he has a way of discovering what's interesting and things that you don't immediately think would be interesting. So even talking about why do we have so many different types of tomato sauce, spaghetti sauce? Why are there so many different ones? And he can tell a story about it in a way that makes you go, wow, that's really interesting. And it gives you insight into the way things think. And then he'll have a complementary piece to that on ketchup. And why do we only have one type of ketchup? And he doesn't really even have an answer. And that's almost what makes it interesting, that the way humans are and finding the nuances, and that's what he does. And so I very much enjoy his way of thinking and analyzing things. And somewhat to that same point that I actually picked up a masterclass that he did on masterclass.com on writing. And it's the first time he's ever kind of taught writing or anything like that. So I'm slowly making through this thing on how does he come up with these ideas? How does he know something's a good idea? How does he put them together? And why is it so intriguing? So I'm going through that course right now. So hopefully I'll have some nice insights from that one. Coming in at number 9 is going to be Better, Smarter, Faster, as well as Power of Habit. I don't have notes in front of me as to who the author of these two books are, but it's the same author, wrote both of these two books. And essentially, kind of his thing is doing studies on productivity for both individuals as well as in group contexts. And so Better, Smarter, Faster deals a good bit more with group contexts and how to get a group to function more efficiently. And some of that's very intuitive and obvious, and some of it's very counterintuitive, the way that groups work. And then the other one, his follow-up book to that was the Power of Habit. And where do our habits come from? How do they form subconsciously? And very interesting study of the way the mind works and the forces, the automated parts that we don't even realize are working all of the time. And a bunch of insights into people that have forms of amnesia and things like that can't remember details, but they can do very intensive different things, and how we can form habits and our mind can form new habits when sometimes they can't form new memories. Very fascinating stuff that it took me a little while to kind of dive into his works, because I had to figure out a little bit what he was trying to do, because it's the way he kind of puts ideas together, it works better as a whole than necessarily in the individual pieces. But once I dug into it, I immediately followed one book up with the second book, because I really dug the way he thought. Next round, at number 8 is two books that aren't from the same author, but Leaders Eat Last and The Talent Code. Now, these ones are chunked together because they ended up having a common theme that I didn't realize this as I went through the books. Leaders Eat Last is from Simon Sinek. He's one of these guys that you've probably seen some of his stuff on Facebook. A lot of his videos have gone viral of him giving speeches on millennials and the workplace, how to motivate people in the 21st century. He's done some TED Talk stuff. And so I checked his out for that reason, that I've heard a lot of buzz about it, and he's kind of one of these, a thought leader right now on productivity, and that's one of the reasons I'm trying to go through all these books. And then I went through the talent code because I read a list of books on productivity, and it recommended a bunch of books. So I added them into my wish list, and then it was on sale on Audible, and that's the process by which I went through it. And I ended up going through them like one after the other, not knowing that they were going to have similar themes. And one of the similar themes is both of them deal with how do we grow in our skills, our talents, how are we motivated? And it explores these ideas through the idea of brain chemistry. So Leaders Eat Last talks about what motivates us, how we're wired to like desire these certain brain chemicals and avoid certain ones and try and pursue certain ones, and how when we're like driven by dopamine, which is the achievement based one, the one that as soon as I started finishing books, I was like, oh, I need to do this more and more and more. That's dopamine. Every time I finish a book, every time I make a new post about it, there's a little dopamine rush that I get. How that as a work culture, when you build a work culture around that one, it can be dangerous. But there's other brain chemicals that kind of give a deeper sense of satisfaction that for communal good, and how we should try to be more productive and build work cultures around some of these other brain chemicals that's not just dopamine, not just the bottom line, not just making more money. So that's very interesting. And then I followed that up with the talent code, which talks about how we grow deep skills, not just having an ability to do something, but how do we get really good at something? And why is it that some people succeed on extreme levels? Why is it some people are able to learn skills on such a deep level, or certain nations produce so many people that are so talented at a sport? And he goes, it's not just nature, it's not just the way you're born, it's not just nurture, it's not just the context where you were raised, it's talent. It's practice, excuse me. The talent comes from practice. And it says that in the book, and I was like reading the book, I was like, oh, you have to practice too. Wow, this book is amazing. This is so insightful. And then it digs in deeper in what it means by that. And it's not as superficial and silly of a statement as it initially read. When you first read it in the book, you're like, what? Like, yeah, of course you need to practice. And it talks about how there's deep practice, and not all practice is equal. And to tie it back to the previous book, it spends extensive amounts of time talking about something in your brain called myelin, and how do you form just these different brain waves with this myelin stuff. And how when you practice at the edge of your limits, where you go to where you're right on the edge of I can and I can't, and you practice and you fail, and then you evaluate it deeply. Why did I fail? And then you practice again and you fail again, and you go, why did I still fail? And you practice again and you succeed. And how this forms something in your brain called myelin, and it requires doing extreme things, being on the absolute edge of your ability, and constantly evaluating, constantly looking at why did I fail? Why did I succeed? And living in that space, that's how you form myelin and form deep talents. So these two books were right one after the other, and they both kind of dug deep into how do we succeed in brain chemistry, the mindset of brain chemistry. So that was very helpful. Coming in at number 7 is going to be Finish from Jon Acuff. So I've been following Jon Acuff for a long time. So he used to have this blog called Stuff Christians Like, which is satirical look at the silly things that evangelical Christians like. And it was really funny. So that's where I knew him from this blog from 10 years ago. And then he got hired by Dave Ramsey to be like a motivational speaker, writer person. I was like, that's a weird team up. And so for years, I thought that was just bizarre until I realized that's really where his passion was at. And that's what he's kind of done. He's written books on finding your career, finding your passion, how to finish things, how to do-overs, start, finish. Those are the names of his books. And I've been a big fan of his book because he's a funny guy, so he's very engaging. He's very grounded. He understands pop culture. He understands what real experiences of people are like. And so you get that flavor of a normal guy trying to figure out career paths, trying to figure out how do we succeed at things? How do we actually follow through on our goals? And so Finish being about finishing things is a great example of that. And even the language I chose to use for finishing books, finish, comes from him. And actually my whole idea about trying to finish 52 books this year is entirely inspired by him. Last year he tried to do, I think, 150 books last year. Maybe it was only 100, but he ended up finishing 150. And that was my inspiration, my motivation for what I attempted to do, was coming off of what he did. which and he wrote several things about it. Like he put a blog post. How do you finish 100 books? How do you finish 150 books? And it's like you have to change the rules. You don't say I'm going to read and then demand that you have to read all these long books, and you can count graphic novels and you can count audiobooks and you can do every trick so that you can actually finish it. You can do that. It's your list. It's your goal. You can do whatever you want. And I went, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to say I read 100 books this year because I'm not going to read 100 books this year, but I can finish 100 books this year. I can listen to them. I can read some. I can expand my definition of what counts. And so that's what I'm doing. And he was the inspiration, and it's tied very much to this book, and that's where my language came from. But the key principle of this book is that perfectionism is the enemy of finishing things. We want things to be finished perfectly, therefore we never finish them, and so we're not nearly as productive. So you have to kill perfection. You have to understand what you can actually reasonably do, and you'll get way more done. You'll move the needle far more if you're trying to finish rather than trying to do everything perfect. And so that was very helpful for me. At number 6 is Jurassic Park. Of course, the classic novel that led to the classic film, and the book just as good as the movie. People, the book's better than the movie, doing all that fun stuff. Jurassic Park, the movie's amazing as a movie. Jurassic Park, the book, is an amazing book. They're pretty close. They're not, there's definitely differences between the two, but they're very book movie type differences of you can go into more detail. You can have a little bit more kind of side things happening when you do a book. You can go more into the science with a book than you can with a movie. And each functions very well as what they're trying to do. And so, number 6. Jurassic Park. Coming in at number 5 is going to be How to Fail at Almost Everything. So this one is from the creator of Dilbert. And John Acuff posted on his Instagram that he'd read this book last year. So I added it to my wish list, and kind of on a whim, I was like, this one that he said was pretty good. I guess I'll check it out. And I loved it. Scott Adams, the guy that created Dilbert, very interesting thinker. Great mind. And very pragmatic. Like, how do you actually get things done? And articulates the way people think through things and why they do things, why they don't do things, in a way that I was like, yeah, that's how people work. That's how people function. And so there's just such great insight in it. I just love the way he thought. And the book's kind of all over the place because it's not really, it's kind of a biography of what he's done. And he's done so many different things and had this insane career that's been all over the place. And so it's kind of tells his story, and then it talks about weird stuff like he lost the ability to talk for 2 years and all the things he tried to do to overcome it. So it's all over the place like a person, but very insightful. Lots of great stuff. Love the way he thinks. So I even checked out another one of his books after this one called Win Bigly. That was essentially his take on how Donald Trump became president. And it's not as good as this one, but it's still a very interesting take on sociology, how people work, and how Trump was able to, this wild television personality, wild real estate mogul guy, was able to become president, and very, being like, this might actually kind of make sense as to how all of this happened. And so a very big fan of his thinking now. At number 4 is How Star Wars Conquered the Universe. So this to me is like the definitive take on Star Wars fandom and where it came from. The book is kind of like 50% George Lucas biography from his upraising to the sale of Star Wars to Disney, and then it's 50% on Star Wars fandom. It's like the chapters kind of go back and forth. One is tracking George Lucas in his time with Star Wars and the creation of everything, how things were written and why things were done, and the marketing deals and the toy stuff. And then it'll go do a chapter that's on that Star Wars nerd kid that was from 15 years ago where he shot himself playing with a lightsaber and he was falling over and stuff. And it was like this very early viral video of the internet, and how that kind of ruined his life, making this video that got found by some people and how it ended up on the internet. And so it goes back and forth between these different things. So very interesting read, great insight, in certain ways very inspiring. So very neat. If you're a Star Wars fan, it's a must read. Coming in at number 3 is Total Recall, Arnold Schwarzenegger's autobiography. It's phenomenal. It's a great biography. If you just want an inspiring biography of a story that's just insane. If you just think about this guy named Arnold Schwarzenegger from Austria, who went on to be the king of bodybuilding, the king at the box office, and then the governor of California. It's just an incredible story. And all along the way, you very quickly understand how it happened. And the drive that he has and how intelligent that he is. And it kind of and the other one I missed, that he's a Republican that married a Kennedy. So he's married to the Kennedy family, which he's like, you don't think about that normally, that he was married to a Kennedy for 30 years. Because you think about him movies and you think about him bodybuilding and you see him as the governor, but his personal life was married to the Kennedys. So as you tell the story, it's all interlaced with the Kennedy family for most of the book. But what makes it so incredible is as you're going through it, you start to understand the reason that he was able to become a movie star was because he was so smart in his handling of his money and his business. And so as he started to make money from bodybuilding, it's not like he backed off on saving or kind of just rode on the fame of that. The whole time he was rising to fame as the top bodybuilder in the world, he had a side business laying bricks. He was writing articles about bodybuilding, and he was trying to get like some acting work just enough so that he could start to put his foot in the door. So he was saving his money and investing in real estate the entire time. And so he's like financially independently wealthy from his bodybuilding and his investment in real estate and everything, so that when it came to acting, he didn't just take every role that was thrown his way, because everyone wanted to cast him as a villain. They wanted to cast him as the thug, as the muscle, and for obvious reasons, because he looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger. But he wanted to be a leading man, and he wanted to be the hero, and so he was able to hold out and gain skills as acting and take the right roles and build a resume so that when the right time came around, he was cast as Conan the Barbarian, and then he's cast as the Terminator, and this just kind of is able to launch a career for him, all because of these smart little choices he made all along the way. And then it's his thought process of picking roles and everything. Such an intelligent man, and of course, pretty good shape, and such incredible drive. And even kind of his value set, he talks about it like in weird ways about his values as a politician and as an actor don't match those of other people, and so he made choices and sacrifices because he doesn't value the same thing that most normal people value. And he's like, you can't have some of the success I had and value certain things that other people value. And just little insights like that throughout the entire thing. That great biography. It might have been top 1 or 2, except it drags when it gets into the governor part, because it's so tied to a specific time period and location. And so I wasn't in California during the zeros when he was governor, so I don't really know what he's talking about. So it felt a little bit detached, because he goes into a lot of specific details about things. And it seems like if you're in California, that's really interesting, or if you're really into politics, that's really interesting. Otherwise, it might have been able to trim that down a little bit to make it have a more broad-reaching appeal for people of all times and all places beyond his time there. Coming in, our runner-up on the list is going to be Consul Wars. This is a cool book. I picked it up kind of on a whim, thinking, this will be interesting. And essentially the book is all about Sega Genesis's rise to prominence defeating Nintendo, because Nintendo had dominated during the late 80s and had just extreme market share. Like 85-90% of the market share was Nintendo by the time the Sega Genesis came out. And it's all about how this guy named Kalinsky took over Genesis, was kind of recruited, how he got recruited, and the decisions that he made all along the way to try and market, how to market the Sega Genesis as the older console, not just for kids, but for older people as well. And all these decisions that he made that, like, I remember these ad campaigns. I remember when this game came out. I remember all these different things that happened, but I have a child's memory of it. And this kind of gave me the adult perspective of what was going on behind the scenes and how did this bring about Sega Genesis for a period of time passing Nintendo and passing the Super Nintendo. So very cool book, both just hearing the story of my childhood, but also just as a marketing book, a book on business, a book on leadership, and the way that he was thinking and looking at things. And so one of the big major things that happened was when he started, they were working on Sonic the Hedgehog, and there were all these battles back and forth, and Sonic was really going to have a girlfriend that was a human that had big boobs, and he's like, no, we can't go, we don't need edgy like that. Like, that's for programmers. That's for weirdos that want that, a hedgehog dating a girl with big boobs. And so, like, kind of, he was the one that kind of shaped it into the Sonic that we know and love. But then he saw the game for the first time, and they're like, people are like, we're going to sell so many copies of Sonic the Hedgehog. And he went, no. I don't want to sell any copies of Sonic the Hedgehog. I want to give it away for free when you buy a Sega Genesis. If you want Sonic the Hedgehog, you need to buy a Sega Genesis. And we'll bundle those two together, and that's the way that we're going to get market share. We need to get people in the door. Once people are in the door and they want Sonic the Hedgehog, they buy our Sega Genesis, they'll be hooked because we have a better product than Super Nintendo. And that was his thought that he had. And it like transformed kind of their business model because they like Altered Beast was the game bundled with the Sega Genesis before, and Altered Beast is a crappy game. And so it's just smart stuff like that and just thinking differently and finding ways to market it and position themselves differently. Very, very, very cool book. Sorry if I'm rubbing my nose a lot. Whenever I talk too long, my nose starts itching more and more and more. And that's what's happening right now. But coming in first place is going to be Steve Jobs. So this one is just it's a book about Steve Jobs, if you probably couldn't have guessed from the title of it. And he's just one of the most interesting people of the last 100 years. Because he's such a weirdo. If you just read about him, so many things about the way he ate food, the way he dressed, just a bizarre human being. And it's even difficult to take away lessons from his managerial style, his leadership style, because he was kind of a monster. And he was kind of out of touch with reality. But there was something about him. There's some weird spark that he had that he was able to accomplish so much and inspire people and make things happen that it's just a compelling story. And just in certain ways, I mean, they made a couple movies about him, but at the same time, it feels like we haven't really gotten a full definitive story because he has like this hero's journey type life story of his rise to prominence, his being fired from the company that he created, this journey into exile that goes on for 10 years, and then his return to Apple. And Apple, even stories that, Michael Dell quotes out there of him telling, if I could advise Steve Jobs, I'd just tell him to sell the entire thing. Like, that's an actual quote that's out there from when Steve Jobs took over this little company called Apple in the late 90s. And then he takes it over. And just the skyrocketing success of how he transformed computer business, the phone business, the music business, all kind of related to these sorts of ideas that he had. And people all the time want to be like, well, he didn't invent the MP3 player. Right. But he knew people and he knew how to take a product. This is a great idea for a product. And how do you sell it to people? That's brilliance. It's not just that you have a great idea. It's how do you take a great idea and get it to the people that want it? How do you make them understand what they want? How do you even shape what people want as time's passing? And so that's the kind of a book that kind of explores all that and his weird idiosyncrasies and oddities of the way he works. And it's a book that it's real a tragedy too, because you can, as you track through his life, it seems a little bit like there's a year, 7-ish, 8 years before he died, to where he could have made a choice as to having a surgery done that might have long-term saved his life and given him another 5-10 years. But he didn't, because of some of his odd idiosyncrasies and odd weird things that he did about himself, or weird ways he did life, that he delayed having this surgery so some of the cancer spread. And so just a very fascinating human being, and the book gives you the full picture of him. And essentially what happened was when Steve Jobs kind of started to know, I'm probably going to die soon, he recruited this great biographer who had written biographies that Steve Jobs liked and said, I want you to write my biography, and I want everything, like just go all in. And so Steve Jobs commissioned this biography of his life pretty soon before he died to kind of make this amazing book that exists now that we can kind of get some glimpse into who he was. And it is a kind of final thought on all this. Even as you finish the book, Steve Jobs, at no point in time do you really understand why he was Steve Jobs. Like, what was it that made him so special? Like that, why was he so brilliant? Why was he have like this odd ability to make things happen? And that's one of the things that just makes him so fascinating, is so mysterious as to why was he who he was, and why was he so successful? So anyway, we're halfway through the year. Those are my 10 favorite books, or clusters on some of those ones towards the end, thus far into the year. You guys read? You guys go through books? Tell me your favorites down below in the comment section. If you got some recommendations for me, tell me down below. You know what to do. If you're watching this first of my videos you watch, click that subscribe button, ring that bell, leave a comment below. Thank you so much for joining me over here on my second channel.